Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 259 for the 11th of Av in a leap year. So there is a quote by Leonard Cohen from his song Anthem, which goes, "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." This is a very famous quote. I see it quoted a lot with my friends on Facebook and things like that. I may have even mentioned it in a previous podcast episode. I'm not quite sure. And so the way this quote is usually explained, the way the quote is usually interpreted, I'll say it once again, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in, is that this is alluding to the flaws in our reality, the flaws in different things that exist, and that the flaws of a thing are actually their beauty. So that for example, if you look at a cup and then there's like some chips on the cup, let's say, because it's fallen sometimes or things like that, that actually is what makes the cup beautiful because it kind of points to the wear and tear of the cup. Or if you look at a person and you look at the wrinkles on a person's face or the imperfect lines on their face, that actually is the beauty of the person. And the different things that we go throughout our lives, our experiences and things like that, that actually is what makes our lives very beautiful. So today, I'm going to take a little bit of poetic license with this quote. I apologize in advance to Leonard Cohen of blessed memory if he takes offense to this, but I think it actually is going to be bringing an even deeper aspect to this quote, and perhaps can be tied into this idea of appreciating the flaws and everything and things like that. But today I'm actually going to look at this quote and I'm going to talk about it in a more literal sense, because literally this idea of there being cracks in everything and this is how the light gets in is actually something that, believe it or not, the Tanya talks about. This is what the Alter Rebbe discusses quite literally today. This idea that in everything in creation, there are actually cracks in creation. There are actually gaps in creation. And these are gaps through which we have the power to draw down light. So what does this mean? This might sound super esoteric, and I know it is, and we'll explain all of this. So as kind of a prelude to this, to what it is that we want to understand about this idea of drawing down the light through the cracks in creation and all of that, let's talk a little bit about creation. So we've spoken quite a bit about creation already, right? In a few places in Tanya, most explicitly in the section known as Shari Chud V'Amuna, which was the second section of the Tanya. That's in season 2 of this podcast, if you want to go back and listen to that. So a big thing, just to kind of sum it all up, this idea of creation, God creating the world, which again was not a one-time event, but it's something that God is constantly doing, something from nothing, bringing the world into creation at all times. The big question that came up there is, how does that happen? Because on the one hand, we talk about how there is nothing but God. There cannot exist any reality other than God. God is the source of all. There's no power other than God. So how could it be that we have a world? How could it be that we're living in this world of diversity, of independent thought, of there's me, there's you, there's plants, there's trees, there's animals, there's trucks, there's cars, how is it that we have all of this multiplicity within our creation if ultimately we know that there can be nothing but God? And we talked about how this is possible by virtue of a very special power that God has, that God created, which is known as the power of tzimtzum, the power of contraction. And through this power of contraction, God set it up so that he was able to contract his light and conceal his light just enough so that there could be this illusion of him not being here, this illusion of diversity, this illusion of multiplicity here in our world. And then through that illusion, he's shown his light down back into this world. And that light is found within all of the multiplicity of our creation. And we gave this light a name, or I should say Kabbalah and Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe gives this certain type of light a name. The name that's given to this type of light that's found within all of creation in this very limited and very specific individualistic way is what's known as the light of Mamale Kolamin, the light that fills all the worlds. Just like it's if you pour water into a cup and you're filling that cup with water, and then you pour water into a different cup and you fill that water, which is maybe a different shaped cup, into that water, that water fills the cup in a very specific way. It's filling it in a very individualistic, according to the contours of the cup, according to the shape of the cup, according to the size of the cup. So similarly, God's light of Mamale Kolamin fills all the worlds, fills everything in this world in its very specific individualistic way. And this light of Mamale Kolamin is described in contrast to another light of God. What's the other light of God? The other light of God is what's known as Sovev Kolamin, the light that transcends all the worlds. What the light that transcends all the world is this is the light which is a little bit more abstract. It's not something that we can experience in this very perceptible, tangible kind of way, because it's the light of God that kind of like gives to everything in an equal measure. It kind of hovers above it all. It transcends everything. It gives us this like hint, this sense of the infinite nature of God, not the finite nature of God, but the infinite nature of God. Another discussion is where we talked about how God is neither infinite nor finite, but he's above both of those things. But in a very kind of more simplistic kind of way of understanding, we can understand that God relates to us in these two ways, of being finite through the light of Mamale Kolamin and through being infinite through the level of Sovev Kolamin. Okay. Now, another point to mention in kind of as an introductory remark for our discussion today of these two lights is that the different actions that we do in this world correspond or connect us with these different types of light. So when we study Torah, for example, when we connect with God's Torah in an intellectual way, like we're doing right now, if you're listening to this podcast, that corresponds to the light that is Mamale Kolamin, that fills all the worlds. Why? Because when you're learning this Tanya, or when you're learning any Torah, what you're doing is you're actually understanding it in a very individualistic way that's specific to you. You're internalizing the teachings, hopefully, right? Hopefully you're not just listening passively. Hopefully you're really trying to understand these things. And in trying to understand these things, you're really trying to internalize it. Torah is likened to food in this way, which food you digest, you chew it, it goes inside, it becomes one with your body. And this again is in contrast to mitzvahs, to doing God's commandments. When we do God's commandments are associated with the level of light, which is Sovev Kolamin, transcends all the world. Why is this? Because we know that Torah is the wisdom of God, but the commandments are the will of God. So wisdom, while it's a very, very high thing, and we know that God created the world and continues to create the world through his wisdom. It says everything was created through Hashem's chokhmah. The will of God is the source of the wisdom. The will of God is above all of that. The will is sort of like that hovering force, that transcendent force above it all. And while will is not something that we can grasp and internalize in the same way that we can grasp and internalize wisdom, like if somebody tells you, for example, like, I really like chocolate milk, and you're like, oh, that's nice. Why do you like chocolate milk? It's like they could tell you why they like the chocolate milk, but that's kind of intellectualizing it. But the simple, like, they like chocolate milk, it's like, there's no real way for you to internalize that in the same way that you can internalize an intellectual idea or the psychoanalysis of the why they like chocolate milk. The only way that you could kind of connect with them liking chocolate milk is to maybe get them a glass of chocolate milk and bring it to them and then make them happy. And you watch how they drink it and they're really excited while they drink that chocolate milk. So that's similar to us with the mitzvahs of God, that we can never really, really grasp God's will on this like inner level, like on the same way we can grasp God's Torah in an intellectual way, but we can connect it to it by virtue of simply doing it, by doing God's will, by doing God's commandments. And now we know that there are a lot of commandments in the Torah, right? There's 613 to be specific, but then they have different subcategories and permutations and all kinds of different things. But there's one mitzvah, there's one commandment that kind of encompasses all of the commandments, that outweighs outweighs all of the commandments. Maybe you guys can kind of guess what that is. We've spoken about this previously. It's a commandment which we actually go so far as we call it the commandment. We call it mitzvah. And what is it? That is the mitzvah of tzedaka, the mitzvah of charity. So the mitzvah of charity is actually a big theme in the Tanya, especially in this section of Iggeres HaKodesh, which we've been learning. This is, again, this section of Iggeres HaKodesh is a bunch of letters that the Alter Rebbe wrote to his Chassidim. And we find that while some of them are quite esoteric and deep, they're also very personal. It's like him personally pleading with his Chassidim for different things. And the subject, the bottom line of this letter today that we're going to be learning is really, even if like, let's say a lot of the esoteric stuff kind of goes over your head, the bottom line of it is really about the power of giving tzedakah, and is about how powerful that act of giving tzedakah is, and how it actually has the power to draw down this transcendent light into our world, where usually this transcendent light is not of our world. It's by nature, it's by definition transcendent. Transcendence usually means it transcends. It's not immanent. It's not here in the world. So how does this happen? How is it that the mitzvah of tzedakah that we do, or really all mitzvahs in general, but the mitzvah of tzedakah in particular, how is it that it is able to draw down this transcendent light of Soviv Kolamin? So to illustrate this, the Alter Rebbe actually brings a very interesting imagery, which is based off of a quote in Yeshayahu, all about a coat of arms. And we'll look at that specific quote when we get into the text soon. And in that quote, there's a connection made between tzedakah and a coat of arms. Like it's this imagery of a coat of arms made out of tzedakah that God is wearing. And the Alter Rebbe kind of points this out to us, and he brings up this interesting point, and he uses the imagery of a coat of arms to actually explain the great effect that tzedakah has on the world in which we live. So to explain this, he really sets up the imagery of the coat of arms. So what is it, this coat of arms, which I don't know if there are still coats of arms out there in the world that are being used. I'm not really sure, but the specific coat of arms that the Alter Rebbe describes is this armor, which is made up of a bunch of chains. So think about that. So try to imagine that coat of arms in your head for a moment, and how it's like, it looks like this whole, suit that a knight is wearing and stuff like that. But if you really look at it closely, it's actually just a bunch of chains that are connected one with another. And each of the chains is covered up by scales, by these metal scales. And so the Alter Rebbe actually will talk about how these little chains with the scales on top of them can be thought of as coins of tzedakah. And that the same way that in making a coat of arms, you take one chain, another chain, another chain, another chain, and eventually you have this whole beautiful coat of arms. That's how tzedakah works also. And it's a very specific imagery. Why? Because in this coat of arms, the way that it's fashioned is specifically with this kind of chains that creates a certain flexibility in the movement of the knight, so that the person wearing this coat of arms is able to move their arms around and stuff like that. The chains are not totally attached, like they're connected in that chain-like way, but they're not glued to one another. And there's a little flap on top, that flap of the scale that's covering up the hole, but really there's a little holes between each one, right? And so we're going to learn how this is true also when it comes to tzedakah, how the tzedakah is kind of like creating these little holes, but at the same time filling up the holes, just like the coat of arms is made up of holes. It's made up of these chains that are like literally just little holes, but at the same time it has scales on top of it that covers up the holes. So what's this about? So in brief, and I want to get into the text soon, but in brief, basically, as mentioned, here in our world, usually the way that we live in our world, the way that God set up the world, the way that God creates the world is through this light of Mamale Kolamin, the light that fills all the world, the light that's very limited, that's very immanent, that's very specific to every individual thing. And it's bound to certain laws of nature, and it comes about through this very like cause and effect kind of thing. But within this world, God created, he gave us power. He gave us, as Jews, the ability to co-create with him and to draw down an even more profound light, to draw down this light that transcends all the worlds. How do we do this? Through the mitzvahs that we do, and specifically through the mitzvah of tzedaka. And so when we do this mitzvah of tzedaka, what we do is we tap into that transcendent light, and that transcendent light actually comes down into the world and creates these little gaps, creates the cracks in the world, creates the cracks in this otherwise very neat and orderly system of Mamale Kolamin, and draws down this transcendent light. And so it's quite amazing, right? But now what happens is that now that the tzedaka has created these gaps in the world, has created these spaces. Now there's a problem, because now that there's space, whenever there's going to be empty space, this is an opportunity for klipa. This is an opportunity for negative forces that conceal godliness to come in. This is why, going back to why God specifically created the world through this system of Mamale Kolamin, because this whole system of Mamale Kolamin, it prevents that. It's like when you make the world in this very neat and orderly fashion, everything has its dimensions, everything has its place, and there's no room for anything else to get in. But once we kind of bursted through this reality, and once we brought in this ability, this potential for this more transcendent light to come down, we open up space in the world, quite literally. And now, interestingly, the remedy for this, the remedy to fill up these holes, to fill up these gaps in the world, is through the tzedaka itself. Where the tzedaka, first, it's like the first level of the tzedaka is the drawing down the light in creating these spaces, just like that chainmail, just like those little links in the armor. But then the second part of tzedaka, so it has two effects. One is creating that opening in the world to let the light come down. And the second one is where it actually closes up that hole, where just like it serves as those scales on the armor to close it up. That's what the tzedaka does also, is it fills it up so that it makes it into a thing. It's like this is a space for tzedaka and not for anything else. It's not for anything unholy, not for anything ungodly in here. So that's, in short, a very brief overview of what we're going to be learning in today's Tanya. So it's a little bit of a longer episode today, so bear with me and let's get into it. But that just kind of, I thought it would be helpful to do that because, to be quite honest, these sections of Iggeres HaKodesh can be quite deep, and it takes me a while. I'm learning together with you guys about a lot of these things. It can get quite esoteric, quite like complex and everything. So I thought it would be useful to give a brief overview of it all before we get into the text today, where it gets a lot more detailed. And so I hope that was helpful. And so here we go. So for context, we are learning today again in Iggeres HaKodesh, and we're going to be learning the beginning, part 1 of 2 of the third epistle of Iggeres HaKodesh. So the Alter Rebbe begins with a quote, as I mentioned before, from Yeshayahu. The quote from Yeshayahu, it's from chapter 57, verse 17, is V'ilbash tzedaka kashirion v'chova Yeshua b'rosho. And he garbed himself with tzedaka, as with a coat of mail and a helmet of salvation upon his head. So in Yeshayahu, this verse is talking about, it's describing God defending his people. It's describing God protecting us, basically. And the way it's described is with this coat of arms and with a helmet. Tomorrow we're going to actually talk about the helmet and everything. And the coat of arms is specifically described as being made up of tzedaka. So why? Why is it made up of tzedaka? So the sages actually talk about this in the Gemara in Bava Basra, page 9b, where it talks about this whole thing that just like in a coat of arms, every single one of the scales add up to create this big coat of arms, right? So too, when you give charity, every little coin of charity that you give, like when you put that money in a pushka, you're just putting, let's say, 1 cent in the pushka every day, that adds up and it creates a very big amount. So what does that mean? At first glance, that might sound really obvious. Like, of course, you give 1 coin, 2 coins, 3 coins, it adds up to a lot. So why specifically, what's the deal with like the coat of arms? So just like a coat of arms is made up of scales that are specifically covering these spaces, these gaps. So that it's the scales protect any kind of arrows from going through those gaps. That's what tzedaka does also. So we're going to understand this. What does this mean? What are we talking about here? How does tzedaka protect from the arrows coming in? So the explanation is that tzedaka is greater than all the other mitzvahs. So why? Because the mitzvahs, it's taught, act as garments for the soul. And these garments come from the infinite light of God, from the aspect of Sovev Kolamin, transcends all the world. So hopefully some of these ideas are familiar to you now from the introduction. So again, so mitzvahs act as garments for the soul. So think about that. Mitzvahs act as garments for the soul, and these garments come from the level of Sovev Kolamin, the level of the light that transcends all the worlds. And then in brackets, the Alter Rebbe says that you can go back and look in Likutei Amarim. That was the first section of Tanya. In chapter 48, we talked about this idea of Mamale Kolamin and Sovev Kolamin. If you want a deeper explanation of those two types of light, you can look there. But going back to our discussion now about how it is that, once again, that mitzvahs act as garments who are coming from the light of Sovev Kolamin, the light that transcends all the worlds. And these garments come about through an arousal from below, which is the mitzvahs of God and God's supernal will. So, in other words, when we're doing, how is it that our mitzvahs serve as garments that come from this level that transcends all the worlds? Because the mitzvahs that we do, these are originating in God's will. And so God's will is from this very, very high place. God's will is from this level that transcends all the worlds. And so this level of God, which comes from this highest place that transcends all the worlds, that acts as a garment, it's specifically, we want to talk about it in a more general way. It acts as a garment for the 10 spheros of the 4 worlds, Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, which come down in a chain-like fashion, cause and effect all the way down in this way of Mamale Kolamin, of the light that fills all the world. So this is basically what I talked about in the introduction, that there's these 4 worlds that make up like what we know of as like creation, quote unquote, the worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, which we've talked about at length in other places. So you can go back and review that if you'd like. And which within each one of those worlds, the makeup of those worlds are the 10 spheros, the Chochmah, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. And so all this whole like system, basically, through which God creates all of creation, is what's known as Mamale Kolamin. And so now this level of God's will is that level of the of Sovev Kolamin, which acts as a garment for these other worlds. Because if you think about it, it's like when you wear a garment, it's something that encompasses you. It's not your body. It's not your physical body. It's something on top of your body. It encompasses your body. So similarly too, God's will acts as the Sovev Kolamin type of force, this transcendent force above all of these worlds in creation. So meaning to say that these worlds, these worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, that have within them and bring about these 10 spheros of Atzilus, and then they come down into Bria and Yetzira and Asiya and all of that, these all come about through contractions, and this is what's known as the Or Pnimi, the inner light, right? This is the aspect of the Mamale Kolamin, the light that is inside all the worlds, that fills all the worlds, is an inner light. And then through the performance of the mitzvahs, we draw down an Or Makif, a light which surrounds everything. So again, it's kind of like the Mamale Kolamin, the light that fills all the worlds. We can think of that as an inner light, an Or Pnimi. And the light that is Sovev Kolamin, that surrounds all the worlds, we can think of it as an Or Makif, a light that encompasses, that like transcends. And so when we do mitzvahs using the physical objects that are here in this world, so the physical objects that are here in this world, again, were created through this Mamale Kolamin, through this Or Pnimi, but then when we do a mitzvah with it, then we're drawing down this light of Sovev Kolamin. So this is the idea of the Yichud. We're creating a unification of the Kudsha Brichu, which is the aspect of holiness of God that's separate from the world, and the Shchinte and the Shechina, which is in the indwelling of the world, as is explained elsewhere. So just like in brief, basically, so again, we relate to God in these 2 different ways. We relate to God in a way of him being transcendent, and we relate to God in a way of him being immanent. So when we do his will, when we perform God's commandments here in this world, using the physical objects of this world, we unite both of them, because we're using a physical object which is a very immanent kind of thing. It's a very tangible kind of thing, but we're using it for a transcendent godly purpose. So we're uniting these 2 forces, which is why many Chasidim will say, L'shem Yichud Kudsha Brichu U'Shchinte, for the sake of the unification of the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Shekhinah and the indwelling force before they do a lot of mitzvahs. It's because they're kind of explicitly saying that they're trying to create that unification through that. Okay, so now through this type of process, through like our doing a commandment, and it creates this clothing, this garment for these different worlds and the spheros and all of that, then a reflection of that type of transcendent light through a great tzimtzum, a great contraction that has to happen. This causes a vestment, like a garment for our souls, for the nefesh, ruach, and neshama of a person in Gan Eden, in the lower Gan Eden, and in the higher Gan Eden. So like this creates garments for the souls in the spiritual worlds, so that they will be able to understand and to enjoy the God as is explained elsewhere. So the basic idea is that through us doing mitzvahs, not only do we create this amazing effect in the upper worlds, or not only the upper worlds, but the lower worlds as well, like all of the worlds where we create these like garments for those worlds, we actually create garments for the souls in the heavens to be able to enjoy and appreciate God and understand godliness to some extent or another. And this is the idea of where it says that in this world, there's this quote that comes from the Gemara in Kedushin, page 39b, which says, "Schal mitzvah b'hai alma lecha." That means literally, in this world, there is no reward for the fulfillment of the commandments. So it's kind of alluding to this fact that when we do commandments in this world, the real effect that they have is in the other worlds. It's in heavens. It's in it's for the souls that are in Gan Eden, for them to be able to appreciate and enjoy Torah. It gives them that ability. So why? Why specifically in the heavens? Because our world is too tough. It's too physical. It's too tangible. So in our physical world, it's too limited and it's too contracted. And the contractions here are too great so that we can't actually get any kind of radiance, not even like a very contracted form of radiance of God. But the only way that we can get this, any kind of radiance of God at all, is through the 10 spheros, which are called the body in the Zohar, in the Holy Zohar. Which is why, since they're called the body, since the spheros are called the body, this is why like body is something that we can kind of somewhat relate to. And we see that the spheros are referred to as a body because it talks about how like chesed is referred to as the right arm, for example, and Iggeres is referred to as the left arm, and that kind of thing. So, okay, but now, just like if we're to compare a body and a soul, like a physical body and a soul, there's no comparison between the two, right? Like you think of a physical body, you think of a soul, they're like two totally different things. So too, is there no relationship at all between the 10 spheros of Atzilus compared to God himself. So it's like the spheros, no matter what level they're at, even if it's like on the highest level, even if we're talking about the level of Chochmah, the supernal Chochmah, which is the very, very first sphera of the worlds of Atzilus, it's thought of as being like physicality. It's thought of as being the level of Asiya and physicality in comparison to God himself, which all of this is explained elsewhere in Tanya, in the earlier part of Tanya and Likutei Amarim, which we spoke about earlier. So you can go back and review those lessons if you'd like. And so now we can understand that why it is that doing tzedaka and doing good deeds, which we do receive somewhat of reward for in this world. So it's explained in Kedushin, page 40a, that there are certain mitzvahs that we actually do see some kind of reward for. This is only possible because there are different gaps. There are different holes, just like those going back to that chain of armor. In these garments that we're talking about, in these garments that are from this place of the transcendence, that cover up the body, which is the vessel of the 10 spheros, and the gaps. It's specifically these gaps that allow for this light to come down here into this world. So it's like the fact that we're basically, in simple English, the fact that like we do experience some reward for some of the mitzvahs that we do here in this world, because really logically we shouldn't, because the mitzvahs are related to the transcendent light, which has nothing to do with our world or any kind of world at all. So the fact that we do experience some kind of reward from these things, like we see, for example, that from chesed, the idea of chesed, then a person might experience long life, like longevity, or from the left arm, a person might experience wealth and honor. Or also like for beauty, the attribute of beauty, a person might experience something that relates to beauty. The Alter Rebbe doesn't really specify what that is. Maybe it's like a person might get beauty, be rewarded with beauty on some level, or so too when it comes to Hod, or that a person might have a certain type of like they're endowed with a certain type of splendor or gladness or things like that. So the bottom line is that we do know that as much as it's like technically not supposed to be possible for us to receive rewards for our deeds, for our mitzvahs here in this world, we actually do to some extent. And the reason why we're able to do that is because these garments that we're talking about, these transcendent garments that are above anything having to do with worlds at all, have gaps in them. And those gaps, those little holes, is where the light comes down through them. Okay, so now we have a problem, like we talked about in the introduction. Because there's these gaps, this is very attractive to the evil forces, to the negative forces that might want to come and suckle from these lights, from these places. So in order for this not to happen, in order for the external forces to not suckle from these lights, and so too to protect people, to protect man from anything negative, whether physically or spiritually, then this light goes right back up and it covers up the hole. It fills in the gap, by way of analogy. So basically, it's like a basic way of understanding this is like kind of like when you do something spiritual, like when you engage in a mitzvah, you're opening up the spiritual channels. You're opening up to this new level of reality. And this new level of reality is very, very powerful. And on that level of reality, it's like it's above anything normal in our world. It's above the natural chain of creation in which everything is given a certain amount of light according to what it is and who it is. So that light is so powerful that it could, God forbid, give even to forces that should not be getting this light. So then the amazing thing is that this light actually goes right back up and it closes up that gap. It like fills in the hole. So this is that light of Sovev Kolamin that we've been talking about, the amazing power of this light of Sovev Kolamin, which has the ability to, first of all, draw down this light into the world, and by virtue of the fact that it actually has gaps in it, and then it's also able to fill in those gaps by virtue of what it is. And so this is why now we can understand this whole idea of it being likened to a chain of mail, to a coat of arms. This where it's like each coin of tzedaka adds up to a very large amount, because now we see how it really is like a coat of arms, where it's like each chain links up and creates this big coat of arms. And then the Alter Rebbe concludes really focusing on this idea of that it adds up to a great amount, where it says lecheshbon gadol. So why gadol specifically? So the Alter Rebbe quotes Tehillim chapter 48 verse 2, where it says Ki gadol Hashem umeulal meod, which literally means that God is great, or great is Havaya specifically, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, and he is very much glorified, meaning it's talking about the infinite level of God that has no limit at all. So that's it for today. I know it's a lot today, but again, just kind of like to sum it all up and bring it back to the beginning, is it's a really, really cool idea, is that basically God created this world with a certain system, like a system of laws of nature and things like that, and the way he set it up. And he even gave us a Torah where we can try to really deeply understand what's going on in this world in a deep way and understand him. But then we have the mitzvahs, which the mitzvahs is something even greater, because what the mitzvahs have the power to do is to actually draw down a light, not only into our world, but actually a much more profoundly actually into many other worlds that are much higher and much more supernal to us, and to create a garment for these worlds that are all around us, that are above us and that are much deeper than our world, and to actually create a garment for the souls in heavens as well, to be able to have them be able to appreciate this deeper, more essential type of God that this more imminent type of light can't really connect with, because it's so limited in scope. And that here in our world, we actually get a glimpse of it as well, and we get a glimpse of that through those cracks, through those gaps that are found in the garments, because the garment is permeable, which is really cool about it. But because it's permeable, it also makes it, God forbid, potentially dangerous. And so that's why the light has to not only come down through the world, but actually to go right back up and close up those gaps as well. And that's what happens when we give tzedakah. And that is how the tzedakah serves as this coat of arms, which is made up of two things. It's made up of these chains that have holes in them. And then it also has the scales on top of the chains that close up the spaces between it, so that the fighter, the knight or whatever, could be protected. So that's it for today. If you have any questions, because I know there's a lot here, please post them in the YouTube comments. I'd love to hear from you. And we will continue with this tomorrow when we conclude this epistle, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.